The moment the CRA investigator said my name in that boardroom, I watched my uncle's coffee cup stop halfway to his mouth. Not because he was surprised to see me. Because the investigator had just introduced me as the lead analyst whose 18 months of documentation had formed the backbone of the federal tax evasion case against Pinnacle Group Holdings. Against him, my aunt, sitting 2 chairs down, made a sound like someone had pressed all the air out of her. My cousin Derek just stared at me, and Uncle Conrad, the man who had spent 4 years telling every family gathering that I was smart enough, just not driven, sat in his $5,000 suit and went the color of old cement. I had waited a long time for that room. Let me go back to where it actually started, because the beginning matters more than people think. It was a Sunday dinner at my uncle's place in Oakville. Late October, 4 years ago. The kind of evening where the leaves are doing that last gorgeous thing before everything dies, and the lake is gray and flat through the floor to sailing windows. Conrad's house was the kind of place that made you feel vaguely ashamed of your apartment, before you'd even taken your coat off. Waterfront property, 5 bedrooms, a wine collection he mentioned every time someone opened a bottle. I was 27. I had left my CPA designation program 8 months earlier, 14 weeks from completing it. I was working at a bookkeeping firm in Hamilton doing small business accounts. From the outside, it looked like I'd quit. From the outside, it looked exactly like that. Derek had just made partner at his firm at 31. My cousin Sasha had finished her MBA and landed a position at a consulting group in Toronto. And me, I showed up in a blazer I'd owned since university and sat at the end of the table across from my uncle's business partner, a man named Fletcher who wore a watch that cost more than my car. Still at the bookkeeping place? Conrad asked. He was passing the bread and not looking at me when he said it. Still there, I said. He nodded in a way that wasn't really a nod, more like a conclusion. My Aunt Roberta asked if I was seeing anyone, which was age of changing the subject. My mother, sitting beside me, reached under the table and found my hand. She always did that. Quietly, in ways that cost her. Conrad was her brother. That house, those dinners, that was her family too. She never said anything. But she always found my hand. What nobody at that table knew, including my mother, was that I had not quit the CPA program because I couldn't handle it. I left because of something I found, and what I found was too large to unknow. 14 months earlier, I had been completing a practicum placement at a mid-sized accounting firm in Mississauga. Routine work, reviewing financials for a commercial real estate holding company, cross-referencing asset valuations against declared income for a portfolio of properties in the Greater Toronto Area. The numbers were clean at first glance. The kind of clean that takes a lot of work to achieve. But I had spent 2 years learning how to read the space between numbers, and something in the depreciation schedules made me stop. The same properties were being valued differently across different filings. Not by small amounts. By 30, 40, in one case nearly 70%. Shell companies were being used to shift income offshore. Management fees were being paid to related entities that had no apparent staff or operations, and the holding company behind several of the largest transactions had a registered director whose name I recognized. Conrad McGuire, my uncle. I sat with that information for 3 days. I didn't sleep well. I second-guessed myself 6 times. I went back through the documents twice more looking for an explanation I'd missed. There wasn't one. On the 4th day, I called the CRA's informant program line. Not because I was brave. Because I was 25 years old and I had found something I couldn't unfind. And the only alternative was to pretend I hadn't. A senior investigator named Patricia Osei called me back within 48 hours. She was careful and deliberate on the phone, the way people are when they already know more than they're letting on. She asked me how I'd access the documents. She asked me whether I had made copies. She asked if I would be willing to meet in person. I left the CPA program a week later, not because I gave up, because walking into an exam room while secretly feeding information to federal investigators was not sustainable as a long-term strategy, and Patricia had made it clear that what I'd found was the edge of something significantly larger. She needed someone with enough accounting knowledge to help them understand what they were looking at. She needed someone Conrad already trusted enough to underestimate. That last part was easy. Conrad had been underestimating me my entire life. My cover story was simple. The pressure got to me. I burned out. I went back to something smaller. It was completely believable because it was exactly what my family expected. I went back to Hamilton. I got the bookkeeping job. I showed up to family dinners in my old blazer, and said little and watched my uncle hold court at the end of the table and let him believe what he believed. By the time of that Thanksgiving dinner in Oakville, I had been working with Patricia's team for 11 months. I was a confidential informant who had become something closer to an embedded analyst, walking Patricia's team through the financial architecture of Conrad's operation, explaining what the documents meant and why they mattered, and how the layers connected. That dinner, I watched my uncle the way you watch someone when you've spent a year learning the shape of what they're hiding. He stepped away from the table twice to take calls. Both times I watched him through the glass doors to the back deck. He was the kind of man who believed he was performing confidence even when no one was watching. Shoulders back, one hand in his pocket, the practiced ease of someone who had never once been caught. On his second call, I saw him mouth something to Fletcher, who was still at the table. Fletcher's expression didn't change. He just picked up his wine glass and looked out the window. After dinner, while Roberta was making coffee, Conrad found me in the hallway outside the kitchen. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about you." He leaned against the wall with the easy authority of a man who owned it. "I could use someone with your background. Nothing major. Just reviewing some internal documentation, keeping things organized. Pays well, better than Hamilton." I looked at him. "That's generous. Think of it as a foot in the door," he smiled. "You've got the skills, you just need the right room." "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long." He straightened up and moved toward the kitchen. Opportunities close. That night I drove back to Hamilton and typed a 4-page contact report. "Now I need to tell you about my cousin Sasha because she's the part of this story I didn't see coming." 3 weeks after Thanksgiving she texted me. Not the group chat, not through our aunt. Direct. Just, "Can you meet me?" Somewhere not near home. We met at a coffee shop on King Street in Hamilton on a Wednesday morning. She was already there when I arrived. Both hands around her mug, not drinking. She'd always been the composed one in our family. The MBA, the consulting job. The one who always knew exactly what to say. She didn't look composed that morning. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to be honest with me, okay? Are you involved with someone looking into my dad?" The coffee shop felt very small. I looked at her for a moment. Sasha looked back, with the kind of exhausted steadiness that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time by yourself. "What makes you ask that?" I said. She set down her mug. "Because I've been keeping records for 14 months. And I don't know what to do with them." What Sasha showed me over the next 2 hours changed the shape of everything. She had stumbled across a second set of financial records in her father's home office 18 months earlier while she was visiting over the holidays. She was in there looking for printer paper. What she found on the desk was a binder she initially assumed was routine business documentation. She was halfway through her MBA at the time. She understood enough to know it wasn't routine. She'd photographed everything on her phone before she fully understood what she was looking at. Then she went back to her apartment in Toronto and spent 3 weeks going through the images. By the time she understood what they meant, she had been sitting on evidence of federal tax evasion for a month. She kept photographing things when she visited after that. Quietly, carefully. "He's been moving money through a numbered company registered in Alberta," she said. "And there's a property in Vaughan that's been transferred twice in 2 years at values that don't make sense." "I know about Vaughan," I said. She looked at me. "I know." I said, "I know how this sounds." She was quiet for a moment. "My boyfriend thinks he's going to invest. My dad offered him a partnership stake in a new project. $120,000 he's been saving for 3 years. She looked down at her coffee. "He doesn't know what the business actually is." "I can help," I said. "But Sasha, if you give me what you have, it becomes part of something you can't pull back from. It doesn't stay between us." She nodded slowly. She didn't look surprised. "I know. I've known for a long time. I just needed someone safe to give it to." She looked up. "I always thought it was strange that you left the program. You were the sharpest person I knew in that family. My dad talked about you like you were a cautionary tale. But I noticed he never actually wanted you too close either. Like he kept a deliberate distance." "People don't watch what they've already dismissed," I said. She slid her phone across the table. "I have 463 photographs. I will skip over the parts that took the longest. Patience doesn't make a story. What I'll tell you is what I learned. And what it cost." Conrad McGuire had been running an income tax evasion and money laundering operation for 9 years. It was not unsophisticated. He had a network of related corporations, 2 of them numbered companies with Alberta registrations, one incorporated in British Columbia under a name with no obvious connection to him. He used inflated invoices between entities he controlled to shift taxable income offshore. He maintained a parallel set of financial records, the ones Sasha had found, that reflected the actual movement of money. The records he filed with the CRA reflected a carefully constructed fiction. He had help. An accountant named Stewart who processed the filings and knew exactly what he was signing. A property manager who facilitated the Vaughan transfers and received a percentage. A bookkeeper who maintained the shadow records and had been with Conrad for 6 years. He had also, in the 2 years before the investigation concluded, begun routing money through a numbered company, co-directed by my father. My father is a retired high school vice principal. He had invested some of his retirement savings in what Conrad told him was a small residential development project in Burlington. Legitimate paperwork. Reasonable projected returns. He had no idea his name was on the directorship registration. He had signed documents at a dinner table, while Conrad talked him through them. And he had trusted his brother-in-law because Conrad was keen, and because my father is the kind of man who trusts family. When Patricia told me, I sat in my car outside their office on Hurontario Street for 25 minutes. I listened to the traffic. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. Then I went inside. The arrests happened on a Thursday in February. Conrad was picked up at his office in downtown Toronto, mid-morning, between meetings. Fletcher was arrested at his home in Burlington. Stewart, the accountant, had already negotiated a cooperation agreement and was not arrested that day. I was not at the arrests. I was at the federal courthouse in Toronto being prepared for what would be the first of 9 days of testimony. Conrad's defense attorney was good. He worked the angles methodically. I was bitter. I was a failed accountant looking for a way to matter. I had manufactured or misrepresented evidence to settle years of family resentment. He used the phrase personal vendetta 11 times across his opening cross-examination. I counted because counting helped me stay calm. What he could not explain away was Sasha's 463 photographs, authenticated and time-stamped. Stewart's cooperation testimony. 17 months of documented transactions that Patricia's team had traced to the cent. Bank records from 3 institutions. A paper trail that ran from Oakville to an account in the Cayman Islands and back again. Conrad was convicted on 19 counts, including income tax evasion, fraud over $5,000, and money laundering. Stewart received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. Fletcher pleaded guilty 3 weeks before the trial date. My Aunt Roberta was given immunity. She had not known. Patricia's team had confirmed that early, and it mattered because Roberta had signed documents she had never read, the same way my father had. Conrad was efficient with trust. Roberta filed for divorce 6 weeks after the verdict. My father's directorship was formally audited and his name cleared. The investment he'd made was ordered returned as part of the restitution process, which would take years to fully execute, but his name was clean. Patricia called him to tell him. He didn't fully understand what I'd been doing for 18 months until that phone call. He cried. He's not a man who cries easily. The hardest moment was not the testimony. It was not watching Conrad's face when the jury read the verdict, though I will not pretend that moment was nothing. It was Sasha in the hallway outside the courtroom afterward. She was standing very still with her arms crossed over her chest, not holding herself, just steadying herself, the way you stand when you're trying not to need anything from anyone. I walked over and put my hand on her shoulder. She turned and leaned against me and let out a breath that had been building for a long time. Did we do the right thing? She asked. I thought about the right answer. The clean one. The one that would hold up. We did the necessary thing, I said. I think those end up being the same most of the time. She nodded against my shoulder. He's still my dad. I know. That doesn't just go away. No, I said. It doesn't. There's a woman named Cheryl Fontaine who lives in Brampton. She and her husband had purchased a property through one of Conrad's associated investment vehicles. A mortgage product connected to the Vaughn scheme, at an inflated valuation they had no way of knowing was inflated. When the scheme unraveled, the loan terms changed. They spent 2 years in financial hardship proceedings. They had to pull their daughter out of the private school she'd been attending. Cheryl had gone back to work full-time at 53 to help cover the shortfall. She came to the courthouse the day Conrad was sentenced. She sat in the public gallery with her hands folded in her lap. When they read out the sentence, 8 years, she closed her eyes. Not dramatically, just briefly. The way you close your eyes when something you've been bracing against is finally over. I thought about that for weeks afterward. I am a senior analyst now, working inside the CRA's Criminal Investigations Division. Patricia Osei is my direct supervisor, and remains the sharpest person I have ever worked alongside. I don't talk about the McGuire case in my professional life. This is the first time I've told the full version of it. What I want you to take from it isn't that I was exceptional. I was a 25-year-old junior accountant who noticed something wrong in a set of numbers and couldn't pretend I hadn't. Everything that followed was just the consequence of that one decision, made alone, on a Tuesday evening in a Mississauga office. The people who called me a dropout, who assumed the smaller job meant smaller ability, who looked at me across a dinner table and saw a cautionary tale. They weren't wrong about what they saw. They just didn't understand what they were looking at. That's the thing about being dismissed. You stop being watched, and there is nothing more useful, when you are doing careful work in the dark, than being exactly the person no one thinks to look for.